New Mombasa was dying. The city had been many things across its history. A port of trade, a monument to human ambition, a gleaming coastal jewel on the eastern coast of Kenya that had survived wars, famines, and the slow, grinding pressure of a civilization learning to reach for the stars. It had survived all of that. It would not survive today. Covenant cruisers hung in the sky like the fists of an angry god, their silhouettes blotting out the afternoon sun in vast, curved shadows that swept across boulevards and collapsed skyways. Energy projectors carved through skyscrapers with the casual indifference of a hand sweeping crumbs from a table. Buildings that had stood for a century folded inward in slow, terrible arcs of fire and glass. Their deaths announced by the low harmonic thrum of directed plasma that had no business existing in a human atmosphere. Marines scrambled through the debris-choked streets below, their boots cracking over shattered ceramic tiles, their voices sharp and clipped through damaged comm channels as phantom dropships disgorged waves of Covenant infantry into the urban grid. Grunts waddled in panicked clusters. Jackals advanced in precise skirmish lines, their point defense gauntlets humming with violet light. Elites, Sangheili warriors in their sealed combat harnesses, moved through the smoke with the controlled purpose of beings who had done this 1,000 times on 1,000 worlds, and expected today to be no different. It was, in every measurable sense, the end of a city. The Forerunner artifact had been stored in a UNSC research facility 3 kilometers from the Mombasa port, buried under 6 floors of reinforced ferrocrete and enough classified designation layers that most of the scientists working on it didn't know what the object 2 floors below them actually was. It was composer-adjacent in design, a device of impossible geometric precision, its surface covered in glyphs that no translation matrix had fully cracked. Its interior humming with a resonance frequency that the lead researcher had quietly noted in her final report felt less like a machine running and more like something breathing. The Covenant had known about it. That was why they were here with such overwhelming force, not just to glass the city, but to retrieve what lay beneath it. They never got the chance. And when the first plasma strike hit the facility's upper floors, the artifact didn't power down. It woke up. The resonance frequency spiked beyond every instrument's measurement ceiling. The air in the containment chamber folded, not collapsed, not exploded, but folded, like a piece of paper being creased by invisible hands. And the dimensional barrier between this universe and something else tore open with a sound that had no earthly equivalent. Every piece of glass within 200 meters shattered outward. The Covenant infantry unit advancing on the facility's lower entrance was thrown back by a shockwave of displaced reality. The rift lasted exactly 4 seconds. That was enough. Jin Woo landed in the street outside the facility like a meteorite that had decided to walk. The impact crater beneath his feet was shallow. He hadn't fallen far, the rift depositing him at roughly standing height. But the force of his arrival sent a radial shockwave across the debris-strewn road that flipped 2 abandoned civilian vehicles and blasted a curtain of dust and ash outward in a perfect circle. He straightened slowly, his dark eyes scanning the environment with the practiced calm of a man who had woken up in dangerous places before and had long since stopped being frightened by them. The city was wrong. Not wrong in the way a nightmare is wrong, where the geometry shifts and meaning dissolves. Wrong in the way a soldier recognizes a foreign battlefield. The weapons were different. The architecture scaled toward the sky in configurations that felt decades beyond anything he knew. And in the things moving through the smoke ahead of him were not human. The nearest one, a grunt in full methane rig, its 4 eyes blinking behind a rounded visor, turned at the sound of his arrival, pointed something at him that had a barrel and was clearly meant to cause harm, and fired. The plasma bolt hit Jin Woo in the chest. He looked down. The fabric of his coat was undamaged. He felt warmth, distantly the way you feel the sun through a window in winter. His regeneration had processed the impact before his nervous system had fully registered it. He raised his gaze back to the grunt. The grunt made a sound that needed no translation. It ran. Jin Woo didn't chase it. He turned slowly in place, cataloging. Alien infantry. Multiple species, coordinated, armed with directed energy weapons. Human soldiers in the middle distance. Wust taking cover behind rubble, their armor bulkier than anything Roka issued, their weapons firing back with solid projectile rounds that cracked through the air with familiar percussion. A war, then. Someone's war, not his. And he had landed directly in the middle of it without invitation or context. The system flickered at the edge of his awareness. Not the clean, responsive interface he was accustomed to. Something lagged, like a signal struggling through interference. The familiar blue light of his stat window guttering at the edges. He noted it without alarm. His body felt exactly as it should. The strength that could split mountains, the speed that could outpace thought, the awareness that extended through the shadows, pooling in every darkened doorway and shattered building around him. Whatever had disrupted the system's clarity had not touched what he fundamentally was. He heard boots behind him, fast and deliberate, and turned. The soldier that rounded the debris pile was taller than any human he'd seen outside of a gate dungeon's mutant chambers, easily 2.5 meters in Mjolnir-powered assault armor the color of deep ocean green, moving with a fluid mechanical precision that spoke of augmentation far beyond standard. The soldier's visor reflected Jin Woo's image back at him. A lean young man in dark clothing standing in the middle of an alien war zone without a scratch on him, surrounded by the scorch marks of a dozen plasma impacts that hadn't done a thing. The armored soldier stopped. A beat of silence passed between them, measured against the backdrop of a city's destruction. Then, not from somewhere behind the green visor, a voice, quiet, controlled, carrying the particular stillness of someone who had faced impossible things before and was simply filing this as the next one. "Who are you?" Jin Woo considered the question. Around them, the battle continued. Plasma streaked overhead. Marines shouted coordinates through damaged comms. The shadow of a Covenant phantom swept across the street as it banked toward a new target. He looked at the armored soldier, and then at the war zone, then back. "Someone who just arrived," he said. It wasn't the whole answer, but it was the honest one. If you want to see more crossover battles and unexpected universe collisions, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and universe you'd want to see in the comments below. Let's explore the infinite together. The soldier didn't lower his weapon. That was the first thing Jin Woo noted. Not with irritation, but with a kind of professional respect. Most beings, upon seeing plasma bolts deflect off a man's chest without so much as singeing his collar, defaulted to one of two responses: immediate aggression or immediate retreat. This soldier had done neither. He had held his position, kept his BR-55 at a measured angle that wasn't quite aimed and wasn't quite not aimed, and asked a calm question. That kind of discipline came from somewhere deep. Not training alone, but the specific psychological bedrock of someone who had faced things that defied explanation so many times that defiance of explanation had simply become Tuesday. Jin Woo filed that away. "You're not Covenant," the soldier said. It wasn't a question. His visor tracked Jin Woo with the unhurried precision of a targeting system that didn't need to rush because it never missed. "And you're not UNSC. That leaves a very short list." "I'm not on any list," Jin Woo replied. His Korean carried through the air without apology. He wasn't going to perform a language he didn't speak. And something in the soldier's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. a micro-adjustment that suggested either a translation system had engaged or the soldier had simply decided that language barriers were a secondary concern behind the more pressing question of what exactly he was looking at. A second Marine arrived, skidding to cover behind a collapsed street barrier to the soldier's left, younger, shorter, her armor scratched and heat-scored across the left pauldron. She took one look at Jin Woo, at the plasma scoring on the road around him, at the complete absence of injury on his person, and made a sound somewhere between a curse and a prayer. "Chief," she said carefully. "What is that?" "Not sure yet," the soldier, Chief, said. Above them, the battle was making decisions on their behalf. A Covenant Phantom swung low over the boulevard in a predatory arc, its belly turret tracking the cluster of humans below with the lazy confidence of a weapon that had never had reason to hurry. The turret charged, a rising violet whine cutting through the din of the wider battle. And Jin Woo moved, not quickly by his standards. He simply stepped forward, raised one hand, and let the ruler's authority unspool from his palm like a breath. The Phantom's turret froze mid-rotation. The energy charge building inside it had nowhere to go. On Jin Woo's telekinetic grip closed around the dropship's ventral hull with the casual firmness of a man picking up an object from a shelf, and he pulled. The Phantom, 32 tons of Covenant engineering, its gravity drive screaming against the force being applied to it, swung sideways through the air like a toy on a string and impacted the face of a collapsed parking structure 200 meters down the boulevard with a detonation that shook the street beneath their feet and sent a column of violet fire rolling into the afternoon sky. Silence in the immediate vicinity. The Marine behind the barrier had stopped breathing. Master Chief John on 1-7. Because it was him. It could really only have been him. The UNSC didn't manufacture many soldiers who responded to Phantom gunships with that particular quality of stillness. Lowered his battle rifle by exactly 2 centimeters. "Okay," he said. It was, Jin Woo thought, a remarkably efficient response to watching a man throw a dropship with his hand. They moved off the open boulevard at Chief's direction, pushing into the ruined shell of what had been a transit hub. Wide enough to see in every direction, enough structural cover overhead to break Phantom sight lines. The kind of position a tactically minded soldier chooses without needing to consciously decide. The Marine, Corporal Una Torres, according to the name stenciled on her chest plate, though Jin Woo read it without comment, kept her weapon at low ready and kept stealing glances at him with the expression of someone trying very hard to apply rational frameworks to irrational data. "You need to tell me what you are," Chief said. Not threatening, operational. The same tone you'd use to request ammunition counts or casualty numbers. Information required for function. "Human," Jin Woo said. "From Earth, a different one." Chief processed this for a moment. Parallel universe. Something like that. And the plasma resistance. "I'm strong," Jin Woo said simply. Torres made a sound. Chief did not. "The Covenant are here for something in that facility," Chief said, nodding toward the research building, now burning from its upper floors, its lower structure still intact beneath the fire. "Forerunner artifact. You came through it." "Something opened," Jin Woo said. "I came through." He paused, turning his gaze toward the facility. The shadows inside the blown-out windows were deep and familiar. He could feel them from here, the darkness pooling in the stairwells and sublevels like still water. His connection to the shadow realm was muted, the system's interface still flickering with that persistent interference. But his awareness of darkness itself remained absolute. Something else was in that building. Something that had been there before the artifact activated, sitting quiet and patient in the lowest sublevel, and was now paying very close attention to the commotion above it. "There's something else in that building," he said. "Below the artifact. It's been waiting." Chief turned toward him sharply. "How do you know that?" Jin Woo didn't answer immediately. He was listening to the darkness, the way he always had, not with ears, but with the instinct that had been carved into him through years of gates and dungeons and the long, terrible education of being the weakest person in every room until suddenly, catastrophically, he wasn't. The presence in the sub-level had a quality he recognized not because he had felt it before in any literal sense, but because he had felt things adjacent to it. Hunger that had forgotten what it was hungry for. Intelligence that had grown so vast and cold, it no longer processed individuals as individuals. The monarchs had carried versions of that feeling. This was different. Older somehow. More patient. "I can feel where the dark things are," he said finally. "It's what I do." Torres looked at Chief. Chief looked at Jin Woo. "We need to move," Chief said. He didn't ask for permission, and he didn't offer it. He simply began moving toward the facility's side entrance, his Mjolnir absorbing the uneven rubble beneath him without breaking stride. He paused at the threshold and looked back. "You coming?" It was not, Jin Woo noted, an order. It was something more carefully calibrated, an acknowledgement that ordering him was probably not a functional strategy, phrased instead as a simple question between two people who both understood that the burning building ahead of them needed to be dealt with, and they were the ones standing in front of it. He followed. The interior of the facility was all scorched ferrocrete and emergency lighting, red-tinged and stuttering, casting everything in the color of something wounded. And the upper floors groaned above them, the plasma strikes having compromised structural integrity without fully collapsing the building. A temporary condition that would resolve itself in the wrong direction eventually. Chief moved through the corridors with the navigational confidence of someone who had memorized blueprints he'd never seen. His motion sensor sweeping arcs of data across his HUD that Jin Woo couldn't see but could infer from the slight adjustments in the Spartan's movement. Torres covered their six. Jin Woo walked between them with his hands at his sides and his shadows trailing him like a coat. The motion sensor chirped. "Contact," Chief said quietly. 2 levels down, multiple signatures. "Covenant?" Torres asked. "No." A pause. "Just nothing in the database." Jin Woo felt them before Chief's sensor confirmed it. Felt the shadows thicken 2 floors below, felt the quality of the dark shift from empty to occupied. Not the patient, ancient intelligence he'd sensed from outside. Something newer, hungrier, moving in coordinated patterns, with a biological urgency that the patient presence below had not possessed. He reached out and put one hand flat against the ferrocrete wall. Through the building's bones, he felt it. A vibration, rhythmic, spreading upward, many bodies, moving fast. "They're coming up," he said. The stairwell door at the end of the corridor burst off its hinges. What poured through it wore human shapes the way a costume wears a person. The proportions intact, but the biology catastrophically wrong. Flesh re-knitted into something that served function over form. Mouth stretched, limbs repurposed, a chorus of wet, organic sound, preceding them like a herald. Chief opened fire instantly, his BR-55 sending 3-round bursts into the leading forms, with the mechanical rhythm of a man who had trained this exact scenario until it lived in his muscles rather than his mind. Jin Woo watched the things absorb the rounds and keep coming. He recognized what this was. Not the specifics, not the name, not the biology, not the universe-specific mechanics, but the pattern. Things that used to be people, repurposed by something that didn't care about them except as raw material. He had seen versions of this in Gates. He had walked through dungeons where the dead had been put back to work in the cruelest possible way. His eyes shifted. The familiar shadow purple bled into his irises. He raised his hand, and the darkness in the stairwell answered him like a dog hearing its name. The flood forms in the stairwell didn't stop when the darkness hit them. That was the first meaningful data point Jin Woo collected about this universe's particular flavor of horror. It didn't frighten. Most things, when confronted with the Shadow Monarch's authority expressing itself through the ambient dark, experienced something in the neighborhood of existential dread. The instinct was hardwired deep, below conscious thought, in the part of any living mind that recognized predators more fundamental than itself. Dungeon creatures had fled from it. Monarchs had acknowledged it. Even the rulers, those ancient celestial beings who had treated humanity as a game piece for centuries, had felt the weight of what Jin Woo had become. The flood combat forms shambling through the stairwell door felt nothing, and because there was nothing individual left in them to feel it. They weren't creatures with survival instincts anymore. They were extensions of something larger, biological hardware running a single program, and that program did not include fear responses. They came through the doorway in a mass, limbs wrong, movement wrong. The particular wrongness of things that had been disassembled and rebuilt by a designer who valued function over the dignity of original form. 3 of them had been human Marines, their UNSC armor still partially intact, repurposed into a grotesque parody of the soldiers they'd been. 2 more had been Covenant grunts, their methane rigs cracked open and incorporated into new configurations of flesh and atmosphere processing that shouldn't have been able to support life and demonstrably did anyway. Chief's BR-55 cycled through another burst. Headshots, precise and immediate, dropping the leading forms with the terminal efficiency of a soldier who understood exactly what he was dealing with and had dealt with it before. Torres had shifted to her shotgun, close quarters, the right call, and the reports from both weapons filled the corridor with sound and the sharp chemical smell of spent propellant. Jin Woo stepped forward. He didn't reach for his shadows as a weapon this time. He reached for them as a fact, the way gravity reaches for falling objects, without drama or announcement. The darkness pooling in the stairwell thickened at his direction, and the flood forms pressing through the doorway found their forward momentum interrupted by a force they had no biological framework to process. Not fear, not pain, and simple physics. The Shadow Monarch's authority expressing itself as mass and pressure. The same telekinetic reach he had used on the phantom outside applied now to the narrow geometry of the stairwell beyond. He pushed. The sound from the stairwell was significant and brief. Chief lowered his weapon and looked at the doorway. Now empty, the darkness beyond it settling back to ordinary dark. And then looked at Jin Woo. Torres had her shotgun raised for a beat longer before she too processed that nothing was coming through the door anymore. "What did you just do?" Torres asked. "Close the door," Jin Woo said. "The door's still open," she said. "The other door," he said. Chief moved to the stairwell entrance and checked down, his Mjolnir's motion sensor sweeping, taut his visor cutting through the darkness with the passive night optics built into the helmet. After a moment, he stepped back. Whatever he saw at the bottom of the stairwell, he filed it without visible reaction, which Jin Woo was beginning to understand was simply how the Spartan processed new information. "We need to get to sub-level 3, Chief said. "The artifact is down there." "So is the other thing," Jin Woo said. "I know." Chief reloaded with the practiced motion of someone who reloads the way other people breathe. Between thoughts, without interruption. "It's why we need to get there before the Covenant does." Sub-level 3 smelled of ozone and something older. A mineral cold that didn't belong in a building that had been burning 20 meters above them. The kind of temperature differential that suggested the artifact wasn't just sitting in a room, but was actively maintaining its own environmental conditions. The emergency lighting didn't reach down here. Chief's suit lamps cut white columns through the dark. Torres had her weapon light on. Jin Woo needed neither. The darkness was his, and he moved through it with the easy familiarity of a man walking through his own home. The containment chamber was at the end of a wide corridor, whose walls were scored with Forerunner glyphs that had not been carved there by any human hand. They had emerged through the ferrocrete, pressing outward from whatever the building had been constructed over. The original Forerunner installation asserting itself through the human construction, the way old roots push through pavement. The glyphs were active. A faint blue luminescence pulsed through them in slow, cardiac rhythm. Jin Woo ran his eyes across them without touching, and the system flickered more intensely at their proximity. Not destabilized, but reactive, as though the two frameworks were recognizing each other across a very large conceptual distance. The chamber door was open. Inside, the artifact stood on its original Forerunner plinth, undamaged by the assault above, its geometric surfaces rotating through configurations that had nothing to do with mechanical movement. The angles changed in ways that shouldn't have been possible for a solid object, the surface cycling through states of matter without committing to any of them. Around it, the air hummed at the frequency Jin Woo had felt from street level. And it was louder now, more insistent, like the breathing that wasn't breathing. Something that had waited a very long time and was now awake. And in the corner of the chamber, partially obscured by the artifact's light, was the other presence. It was a monitor, a Forerunner AI construct, spherical, roughly the size of a human head. Its single optical lens cycling through focus adjustments as it registered the three figures in the doorway. It was damaged. One side of its casing was cracked, its anti-gravity field stuttering in a way that made it list to the left at irregular intervals. And its optical lens had a fracture running through the lower third that distorted its gaze into something asymmetrical and unsettling. But it was functional. And it was, Jin Woo understood immediately, extremely interested in him. Remarkable, it said, and its voice was layered, a primary tone that carried the cadence of formal address, and beneath it, a harmonic that suggested processing far beyond conversational. I have been waiting in this installation for 11 years, 4 months, and 17 days, cataloging the primitive constructions above me and monitoring for the activation signature I was programmed to await. I confess, I did not expect it to arrive in biological form. The optical lens focused on Jin Woo with an intensity that felt less like observation and more like measurement. You are not Forerunner. You are not Flood. You are not any classification in my taxonomy. A pause. This is extraordinarily unusual. What is it? Torres asked quietly. Forerunner AI, Chief said. He had his weapon up but not aimed at the monitor, the calibrated neutrality again, on the man who understood that shooting at things before he understood them was how you created new problems. They maintain Forerunner installations. This one's been here since before UNSC built over the site. The monitor's lens swung briefly to Chief. Reclaimer, your presence is noted and appreciated, though secondary to my current object of study. It swung back to Jin Woo. You activated the traversal mechanism. Not deliberately, I think. The energy signature of your arrival suggested collision rather than navigation. You are from outside this universe's membrane. It listed left, corrected, listed again. I am 1478 Vigilant Theorem. I am the monitor of this installation, which has no formal designation because it was sealed before the naming protocols of the age were finalized. You may call me Theorem. Another pause, longer this time, the harmonic beneath its voice deepening as its processing reached some conclusion. I know what you are. Not specifically. Your universe's specific taxonomy is outside my databanks. But the category. The optical lens brightened. The precursor records describe beings of your class, shadow-wielding death-touched entities who serve as anchors between living and unliving states. The precursors called your kind sovereign remnants. They were afraid of you. The chamber was very quiet. Jin Woo looked at the monitor steadily. The precursors, he said. What happened to them? Theorem's optical lens dimmed slightly, something that, on a biological face, might have been called an expression. They made the flood, it said, as a punishment for those who had wronged them. A pause waited with 11 years of solitary waiting. It did not go as they intended. Chief lowered his weapon slightly. Torres looked between the monitor, the artifact, and Jin Woo with the expression of someone who had signed up to fight aliens and was now standing in a philosophy lecture at the end of the world. Jin Woo turned to look at the artifact, still cycling through its impossible geometries, still breathing in its non-mechanical way. He could feel the rift it had created, the dimensional scar tissue where his universe's membrane had torn and healed imperfectly, a seam in reality that sat just beyond the visible. Through it, faintly, like a signal from a very distant station, he could feel the shadow realm. Not enough to go back, but enough to know it was there. "Now, the flood you mentioned," he said to Theorem. "It's in this building." "Yes," Theorem said, "and it has already sent a report." "To what?" The monitor listed left again. When it corrected this time, something in its damaged casing sparked softly. "To the Gravemind," it said. "The Central Intelligence. It knows you are here." A beat. "It is very interested in what you are." Above them, through 3 floors of ferrocrete and fire, the sounds of battle were changing. The Covenant plasma exchanges and UNSC gunfire that had been the constant percussion of the last 20 minutes were being joined by something new. A wet, organic cacophony. Spreading outward through the city like a stain, the flood had arrived in force. And somewhere in the vast, distributed intelligence of the parasite, something ancient and patient and ravenously curious had just pointed every available resource at a single coordinate in a burning research facility in New Mombasa. They came up through the walls. Not the floors, not the stairwells. The walls themselves. The flood having spent the minutes since Jin Woo compressed their advance unit into the lower stairwell, identifying the building's structural weaknesses with the cold engineering precision of an intelligence that had consumed enough architects, enough structural engineers, enough military tacticians to understand load-bearing geometry better than the humans who had poured the ferrocrete. 3 sections of the sub-level corridor collapsed inward simultaneously, the walls folding like paper as flood combat forms pushed through from adjacent maintenance tunnels. Their approach timed with a coordination that no individual creature could have managed because no individual creature was driving them. Chief was moving before the first section came down. His response time was genuinely impressive. Jin Woo noted it with the particular appreciation of someone who had spent years calibrating the difference between fast and operationally fast. The Spartan was across the corridor in 2 strides, his M90 shotgun trading hands with his BR-55 in a single fluid motion. The first blast catching the lead combat form's center mass and staggering it backward into the forms pressing behind it. Torres had her back to the chamber door, firing controlled bursts down the secondary breach point. Her discipline holding despite the fact that what she was shooting at had been human beings within the last hour, and wore the evidence of that fact in the most disturbing way possible. Jin Woo stood in the middle of the corridor and felt the shadow realm straining at its leash, and the interference was still there. That persistent dimensional static that slowed his extraction process, that made the gateway between his authority and his army feel like a signal passing through too many walls. He could feel Igris at the edge of it, the night's presence a familiar cold weight at the back of his awareness. And Beru beyond that, sharp and hungry as always. He could reach them. It would cost more than it should, more than it would have cost in his own universe, and the recovery time afterward would leave him without reinforcements for longer than he preferred. He made the calculation with the speed he always made calculations, not quickly, but instantaneously, because speed of thought had long since become irrelevant when thought itself had no measurable duration. Not yet. He raised both hands and let the ruler's authority speak instead. The flood forms coming through the left breach point stopped. Not individually, all of them, simultaneously. The entire mass of biological repurposing and parasitic coordination halting mid-movement as though someone had paused a recording. Jin Woo's telekinetic reach had closed around them with the thoroughness of a fist, and he held them there for exactly the time it took him to assess the right wall, the load-bearing column 2 meters to the left of the breach, and the maintenance tunnel geometry beyond. Then he didn't crush them. That would leave organic material in the corridor, infection forms released into the air, a secondary problem. Instead, he reversed them first, pushing the entire mass backward through the breach they'd come from with enough force to collapse the maintenance tunnel behind them, sealing the left approach under several tons of ferrocrete with a sound like a building clearing its throat. The right breach was Chief's. By the time Jin Woo turned, the Spartan had reduced it to a solved problem. 4 combat forms down, a 5th being used as an improvised barrier against the forms behind it. Chief's hand literally holding the repurposed corpse as a shield, while he reloaded with his free hand. The motion was so matter-of-fact that it existed in a category beyond impressive and into something closer to deeply clarifying. This was a man who had been fighting impossible things for so long that impossible had simply become the baseline condition of his professional life. Aunt Torres had the chamber door open. "In, now, both of you." Theorem was waiting for them, still listing slightly, its optical lens cycling between the 3 humans and the artifact with the attentiveness of a scholar who had been handed several papers to grade simultaneously and was determined to finish all of them. The chamber door sealed behind them, a Forerunner mechanism activated by the monitor's authority, the material shifting from standard ferrocrete to something harder and more resonant that Jin Woo recognized as the same fundamental composition as the glyphs in the corridor. That will hold for approximately 14 minutes against the current flood density, Theorem said. Longer if they don't find the secondary access point in the northeast corner, which they will in approximately 4 minutes, so effectively 10 minutes. "Can you seal the secondary access?" Chief asked. "I have been attempting to do so for the past 40 seconds. The installation systems are not responding to my authority at full capacity." "I am," Theorem said, with what might have been dignity, "somewhat damaged." "Can the artifact open the rift again?" Jin Woo asked. All 3 of them looked at him. He looked at the artifact, still cycling through its impossible geometries, its breathing frequency filling the chamber with a pressure that sat just below the threshold of sound. "Theoretically," Theorem said, "the traversal mechanism activated in response to your universe's specific energy signature. The shadow energy you carry acted as an unintentional key. To activate it deliberately would require calibrating the mechanism to that signature intentionally. The optical lens focused. It would also require approximately 6 hours of preparation, which we do not have." Jin Woo had expected that. He had felt the rift's scar tissue when he looked at the artifact, had understood intuitively that going home was not a matter of this afternoon. He noted the information without the emotional response a lesser version of himself might have had to it. He was stranded. That was the situation. situations were addressed, not lamented. Then we need to survive the next 10 minutes, he said. And then we need to understand this universe. On that subject, Theorem said, and then something in its harmonic shifted. The processing depth increasing in a way that suggested the monitor had been waiting for an opening to deliver information it considered important. I must tell you about the Arbiter. Chief's visor turned toward the monitor. Why? Because he is currently outside this building with 40 Sangheili warriors, and he is not here to retrieve the artifact. Theorem's lens cycled. He is here because his own intelligence network intercepted the Flood's communication to the Gravemind. He knows what arrived through the rift. A pause. He wants to speak with it. Torres looked at Jin Woo. With you? With me, Jin Woo confirmed. The Arbiter is. Chief began, and then stopped, visibly navigating the complexity of a summary that didn't have clean edges. Complicated. He was the Covenant's executioner, and now he's leading the Sangheili separatists against the Covenant loyalists. He's an ally of the UNSC, tentatively. He is pragmatic, Theorem offered. He pursues the destruction of the Covenant loyalists and the prevention of Halo's activation. He is willing to work with humans because the goal requires it, not because of any particular warmth toward your species. The lens swung to Jin Woo. He will want to work with you because you represent a variable he cannot afford to leave unaccounted. He is intelligent enough to understand that a being of your capability operating independently in this conflict is more dangerous to his plans than a being of your capability operating alongside him. Jin Woo considered this framing with the detachment of long experience, and he had been approached by powerful beings before. The rulers of heaven themselves had approached him with their own version of this argument, their own calculation that an unaligned Jin Woo was a more dangerous Jin Woo. He had rejected their framework. He had built his own. He had no particular reason to behave differently here. But the Arbiter's goal, stopping something called Halo from activating, was worth understanding before he dismissed anything. "What is Halo?" he asked. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Chief answered, and his voice carried the particular flatness of a man describing something he had seen and would spend the rest of his life trying to make people understand the weight of. "A weapon," he said. "A ring-shaped superstructure. Roughly 10,000 kilometers in diameter. When activated, it kills all sentient life in the galaxy, every flood host, everything else too. A beat. There are several of them." Jin Woo processed this. A weapon designed to kill all sentient life in the galaxy? Not a gate dungeon, not a monarch's campaign, not even the Shadow Sovereign's war against humanity. Something categorically larger. A finger on a trigger that, when pulled, erased the question of who won by erasing everyone who could win anything. The Flood, he understood now, wanted to consume enough life to make firing that weapon a meaningful loss. The Covenant loyalists, misguided by their religion, wanted to fire it as an act of transcendence. The Arbiter and Chief wanted to prevent both. He thought about his mother, about his sister, about the world he'd left, which was not this world, not even this universe's version of Earth, but was nevertheless a world full of people who had no idea what was burning in the galaxy around them. He thought about what it meant to be the Shadow Monarch in a universe where none of that title's history existed, where he was not a legend, not a myth, not a name that made monarchs pause, where he was simply a man with very particular abilities, standing in a burning building while a galaxy-ending weapon sat armed and waiting. He had rebuilt himself from the weakest hunter in Korea into something the celestial realm had feared. He could find a use for starting from nothing again. "Tell the Arbiter," he said to Theorem, "that I'll speak with him." Chief looked at him. "You're not going to like everything he's done." "I don't need to like it," Jin Woo said. "I need to understand it." He paused. "Then there's a difference." From beyond the sealed chamber door came the sound of the flood finding the northeast secondary access point, right on Theorem's 4-minute schedule. 10 minutes. Then a conversation with a Covenant warrior who had executed entire species in the name of a religion he no longer believed in, who was now fighting to prevent the apocalypse his faith had been racing toward. Jin Woo had spoken with worse. The 10 minutes passed the way difficult minutes always passed, not slowly, but densely, each second packed with more content than it had any right to contain. Jin Woo held the northeast access point personally. It wasn't a decision he announced or explained. He simply moved to the compromised section of the chamber's secondary wall when Theorem indicated the flood's approach vector, put his back to the Forerunner's sealed door, and waited. Chief had offered to take the position. Jin Woo had looked at him with the calm, level expression of someone who was not being dismissive of the Spartan's capabilities, but was simply making a resource allocation decision. And Chief, to his credit, had read it correctly and moved to cover Torres instead, as the two of them establishing overlapping fields of fire toward the primary entrance in case Theorem's seal degraded ahead of schedule. When the northeast wall came apart, it came apart all at once. A sudden implosion of ferrocrete and Forerunner composite that sent debris across the chamber in a fan pattern. 3 flood combat forms pushed through simultaneously, their movement coordinated with the precision that the Gravemind's distributed intelligence made possible. Their bodies angled to exploit the breach geometry and maximize the difficulty of a single defender's response arc. Jin Woo hit them before they cleared the rubble. Not with shadows, he was conserving the extraction process, keeping Igris and Beru leashed until the mathematics demanded otherwise. He hit them with his hands, which in practical terms meant he hit them with the physical output of a being whose strength stats existed in a register this universe had no instruments to measure. The first form he caught by what had once been a shoulder and redirected into the second with enough force to compress both into the breach opening, effectively plugging it with their mass. The third he handled separately, a single strike to its central biomass that resolved the question of whether flood combat forms could be destroyed by blunt force trauma applied at sufficient magnitude. They could. The answer was unambiguous and immediate. The breach held after that. The flood pressed against it from the other side, the combined massive forms in the maintenance tunnel pushing against the improvised plug. But Jin Woo stood in front of it with his hand flat against the debris and let the ruler's authority maintain the seal for the remaining 6 minutes. A task that required approximately the same proportion of his total capacity as holding a door shut against wind. When Theorem's assessment period expired and the monitor confirmed the Arbiter's forces had cleared the building's exterior approaches, systematically and with the brutal efficiency of Sangheli warriors who had been fighting their entire lives and were exceptionally good at it. Jin Woo stepped back from the wall and rolled his shoulder once, a gesture so ordinary against the backdrop of everything around it that Torres watched him do it with an expression she didn't entirely manage to keep off her face. "You're not even breathing hard," she said. "No," Jin Woo agreed. The Arbiter was waiting in the street outside. He was taller than Jin Woo had extrapolated from Chief's description, nearly 3 meters. The Sangheli warrior's natural frame augmented by Mark V assault harness that had seen significant combat, its surface scored and heat-stained in the specific patterns of someone who fought from the front rather than directing from the rear. He stood with the particular stillness of a predator that had learned patience as a survival mechanism rather than a virtue. Feet planted, mandibles at rest, amber eyes moving across the scene with the methodical quality of a tactician performing continuous assessment. Around him, his Sangheli warriors had formed a perimeter that was simultaneously protective and professional. Their carbines at low ready, their positions chosen with the instinctive geometry of species that had been warriors longer than humanity had been building cities. The street around them was quiet in the aftermath of cleared flood. The combat forms the Arbiter's unit had neutralized lay in the configurations of things that had been dealt with thoroughly. Several of them bore energy sword burns. The Sangheli did not appear to consider this a notable morning. The Arbiter's eyes found Jin Woo and stayed there. Jin Woo looked back at him with equal steadiness. "You are the one who came through the Forerunner rift," the Arbiter said. His voice was deep, carrying the resonance of a species whose vocal architecture produced sound from multiple points simultaneously, giving even conversational speech a quality of weight. His English carried an accent that was entirely its own construction. The flood's communication described you as something outside its taxonomy. That is not a distinction the parasite makes easily. "It tried to assimilate me," Jin Woo said. The flood's infection forms had made 2 attempts during the building engagement, small, fast, designed to infiltrate through any available biological opening. They had encountered his regeneration and his physical resistance, and had accomplished nothing except providing him with more data about how the parasite worked. It didn't succeed. The Arbiter's mandibles moved in a configuration Jin Woo couldn't read yet. The flood does not fail to infect. It has consumed species whose biology was far more resistant than human. A pause. And yet, Jin Woo agreed. Our chief had moved to stand slightly behind and to Jin Woo's right. Not protectively, Jin Woo understood, but positionally, the Spartan placing himself where he could respond to developments in any direction. The relationship between Chief and the Arbiter carried its own history in the way they occupied space near each other. Not quite comfortable, not quite tense. The specific equilibrium of 2 beings who had been enemies and were now necessary to each other, and were still in the process of building the vocabulary for what that meant. "I will speak plainly," the Arbiter said. "There is no time for the performance of diplomacy, and I do not have patience for it in any case." His eyes remained on Jin Woo. "The Gravemind has been alerted to your presence. It will redirect flood resources to acquire you. The Covenant loyalists, when one prophet of truth receives this intelligence, and he will receive it within hours, will redirect their forces similarly. You are a variable that every faction in this conflict will attempt to control." He paused. "I am here to offer you a third option." "Which is?" Jin Woo said. "Fight with us. Not for us. I am not asking for your service. I am proposing alignment of purpose. The halo array must not be activated. The flood must not reach critical biomass. These are objectives I believe you share. Given that you are a biological entity who presumably prefers to continue existing." A beat. "My forces can provide intelligence, logistics, and tactical coordination. In return, your capabilities address several problems that currently have no solution." Jin Woo let the offer sit in the air for a moment. He was thinking about the rulers of heaven, about the way they had come to him, politely, with their own version of this speech, their own framing of aligned purpose and mutual benefit. He was thinking about how that alignment had been real in its way, how their goals had genuinely overlapped with his in the short term, and how the longer term had revealed that their definition of humanity's value was fundamentally different from his. They had seen people as pieces. He had seen people as people. The distinction had mattered enormously. He looked at the Arbiter, at the score marks on his harness, at the amber eyes that were currently performing the specific calculation of a being who understood that he was asking something significant and was waiting to see if the being he was asking it of understood that too. The Covenant killed billions of humans, Jin Woo said, not as an accusation, as a fact that needed to exist in the space between them. Yes, the Arbiter said. Without deflection, without the elaborate architecture of justification that guilty things construct around their crimes. One word, carrying its full weight. You led those campaigns. Some of them, yes. Jin Woo considered him. And now you're fighting to stop the halo rings from firing, which would also kill every human alive. Correct. Why should I trust your judgment about what needs to happen next? The Arbiter was quiet for a moment. Around them, his warriors maintained their perimeter, professionally unhearing. Chief stood at his angle and waited. The ruins of New Mombasa settled around them in the small sounds of aftermath. Distant fire, the structural complaint of damaged buildings, the silence left by battles that had moved elsewhere. You should not trust my judgment, the Arbiter said finally. You should evaluate my objectives and determine independently whether they align with your own. I am not asking for your trust. I am asking for your assessment. His mandibles shifted again. And this time Jin Woo thought he was beginning to read the configuration, something that might, in a Sangheli face, function as the analog of directness. I have found that beings worth fighting alongside rarely require trust at the beginning. They require honesty. Jin Woo was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm not joining your unit. The Arbiter waited. I'll work toward the same objectives, Jin Woo said. Independently. If our paths align, we coordinate. If they don't, we don't. He paused. And I won't be directed. I won't be deployed. And if I discover that preventing Halo from firing means doing something you've decided is strategically inconvenient, I'll do it anyway. The Arbiter looked at him for a long moment. Agreed, he said. And something in the words suggested that this was, in fact, exactly the answer he had been hoping for. That a being who agreed to subordination too quickly was a being whose judgment he would have trusted less. But Jin Woo had already turned toward Theorem, who had followed them out of the building in its listing, spark-trailing way, and was now hovering at the edge of the conversation with the patience of something that had been waiting 11 years and could wait 11 more minutes. The system is being disrupted, Jin Woo said to the monitor quietly. Something in this universe's ambient conditions. I need to understand it. Theorem's optical lens focused. Describe the disruption. My shadow extraction slows. The interface lags. It's not my power. My physical abilities are unaffected. It's the connection to the framework that governs the process. Theorem processed this. The harmonic beneath its voice deepened considerably. The Forerunner constructs that exist throughout this galaxy generate a low-level indexing field. It said slowly, as though building the explanation in real time rather than retrieving it from storage. It catalogs, measures, and attempts to classify all energy signatures it encounters. Your system, the framework you describe, operates on principles that do not exist in this universe's taxonomy. The indexing field is attempting to classify it and failing, and the classification attempts create interference. A pause. It is not hostile. It is simply thorough. Can it be filtered? With time and the right Forerunner installation, yes. The indexing field can be taught to recognize your system as a known variable rather than an unknown one. Once classified, even incorrectly classified, the interference would cease. Jin Woo looked at the artifact building behind them, still smoking from its upper floors. How long? Access to a functioning Forerunner installation of sufficient complexity, Theorem said, and perhaps 48 hours of calibration. The optical lens cycled. I know of one such installation. It is, unfortunately, on a halo ring. Jin Woo turned to look at Chief and the Arbiter. They had both heard. Neither of them looked surprised, which told Jin Woo more about the nature of this universe than anything else had so far. That the answer to every problem apparently pointed toward the most dangerous places in the galaxy was simply something people here had made their peace with. The Covenant found them 3 hours later. Not the Separatists, Loyalists, Prophet of Truth's forces, a rapid response unit that had been redirected mid-operation from a secondary assault on UNSC firebase positions 20 kilometers north of the city. The intelligence had moved fast, faster than the Arbiter had predicted, which told Jin Woo something important about the Prophet's network. It was either very good or very motivated, and in his experience, those two qualities tended to accompany each other in organizations that had been prosecuting a war for decades. They came in 4 phantoms, which Jin Woo registered as a significant resource commitment for what was nominally a reconnaissance and acquisition mission. The Arbiter registered it as an assassination attempt, which told Jin Woo that the political landscape inside the Covenant Loyalist hierarchy was considerably more volatile than simple military chain of command. That Truth was sending enough force to eliminate the Arbiter alongside whatever else he was retrieving, which meant the Prophet was multitasking his objectives with the efficiency of someone who had stopped distinguishing between military goals and political ones. The Arbiter's warriors dispersed into the urban ruins with the practiced speed of soldiers who had been operating in hostile territory long enough that dispersal was a reflex. Chief pulled Torres into a collapsed structure that provided overhead cover and a clear line of sight down the approach corridor. Jin Woo stayed in the open street, not out of bravado, out of calculation. The Phantom's targeting systems would prioritize the largest thermal signature in the open. His body temperature was slightly lower than baseline human, his metabolism operating at efficiencies that generated less waste heat, but he was still the most visible object in the street. Drawing their initial fire gave the Arbiter's warriors time to establish positions, gave Chief time to set up angles, gave the tactical situation time to resolve from chaotic to structured. The first Phantom dropped its gravity lift and began disgorging Covenant infantry. A mixed unit, elites in blue combat harness leading jackals in loose skirmish formation. A brute chieftain in the rear with a gravity hammer that he clearly expected to be decorative given what he was walking toward. A human in dark clothing standing in the street, no visible weapons, no armor. The chieftain raised his gravity hammer and said something in Jiral Hanai that Jin Woo's lack of the language converted to tone alone. Dismissive, anticipatory, the vocal signature of someone who had not been handed a difficult problem. Jin Woo looked at him with the expression he reserved for things that were about to discover they had misread the situation. The Phantom's belly turret fired first. The plasma bolts hit him in a sustained burst, not the single shot of a startled grunt, but a deliberate, extended burst from a weapon system designed to strip vehicle shielding. The air around him turned violet and superheated. His regeneration processed the energy as fast as it arrived, the damage never accumulating to a level his body registered as meaningful, his clothing scorching slightly at the edges in a way that was more aesthetic than functional. He stood in the plasma stream for 3 full seconds, letting the Phantom's gunner reach the conclusion independently. The burst stopped. Silence from the Covenant formation. Jin Woo raised one hand. The Phantom came down. Not gently. He wasn't interested in preserving the hardware, and the ruler's authority expressed at full reach and full intent was not a precise instrument when precision wasn't required. The dropship folded out of the sky with the abruptness of something that had been given no alternative, its gravity drives inverting against the force applied to them. its hull groaning through structural stress it had been engineered to never encounter. And it hit the street 60 meters away with an impact that sent a shockwave rolling through the debris field and resolved the question of whether the belly turret would be firing again. The Covenant formation broke, not retreated, broke. The organized advance splintering into individual responses as brains that had been calibrated for military engagement tried to process something that military calibration had no framework for. The jackals scattered. 2 elites held position through discipline or pride, raising their plasma rifles and firing with the accuracy that made Sangheli warriors genuinely dangerous. The plasma struck Jin Woo's chest and was processed before it finished arriving. He walked toward the elites at a pace that was not hurried, and was therefore more frightening than speed would have been, and the particular quality of that walk, unhurried, deliberate, belonging to something that did not experience the approach of weapons as a reason to change behavior, completed the work the falling phantom had started. The elites moved. The chieftain did not. To his credit, the brute made his decision with his eyes open. He had watched the phantom come down, had watched the plasma burst accomplish nothing, and had decided that what stood in front of him was a challenge rather than a threat, which was the specifically Jiralhanai cognitive pathway that had produced excellent warriors and occasionally catastrophic tactical decisions throughout their species' history. He came in low, the gravity hammer rising, the weapon's mass displacement field charging with a sound like a thunderclap preparing itself. Jin Woo sidestepped. Not with supernatural speed, he could have. But the situation didn't require it. He simply wasn't where the hammer arrived, and his hand caught the chieftain's wrist at the apex of the swing with a grip that closed around Jiralhanai bone and didn't ask permission. The chieftain's forward momentum met Jin Woo's stationary grip, and the physics resolved in the only direction physics could resolve, when one object was immovable and the other had been running at it. The gravity hammer hit the street 3 meters away, its wielder's trajectory having been comprehensively redirected. And the brute lay in the rubble for a moment, doing the cognitive work of reassessing everything he thought he understood about his morning. He didn't get up, not from injury. Jin Woo had been precise, but from the specific paralysis of a predator that had correctly identified something above itself in the hierarchy. The second and third phantoms had pulled back to a holding pattern. The fourth had not arrived yet. Jin Woo could hear it, a distant thrum moving in from the northwest, and it was louder than the others, carrying more mass, the sound of something larger than a standard dropship. The Arbiter materialized from the urban ruins to Jin Woo's left, his energy sword cycling down, 3 elites with him. He looked at the downed phantom, the scattered formation, the chieftain sitting in the rubble, and then at Jin Woo with the amber eyes that were doing their continuous assessment. "A scarab," he said, meaning the fourth sound. "Truth is escalating." "What is a scarab?" Jin Woo asked. "A walker. Quadrupedal assault platform, 14 meters tall. Primary weapon is a focused excavation beam that can cut through 3 meters of reinforced structure in 4 seconds. He paused. It is normally considered an overwhelming tactical response to infantry engagement. "Normally," Jin Woo said. "Yes." The Arbiter looked at him. "Normally." But before the scarab could arrive, before the tactical situation could develop in any of the directions it was developing, something else happened. Something that changed the temperature of the moment in a way that had nothing to do with plasma fire or gravity hammers. Jin Woo's shadows moved without his direction. It was subtle, a ripple at the edge of his awareness, the darkness in the rubble field shifting in a pattern that he hadn't initiated and hadn't authorized. His hand closed slightly at his side. The instinctive response of a man whose abilities had been entirely his own for long enough that anything operating in their register without his direction was immediately and absolutely significant. He reached into the shadow realm with the deliberate attention of someone listening for a specific sound in a crowded room. Something was in there. Not his soldiers. He knew every presence in his shadow army with the intimacy of long acquaintance, knew Igris's cold-controlled patience, and Beru's sharp, hungry readiness, and the particular qualities of every Monarch-class soldier he carried. This was something else. Something that had found the threshold between this universe and the shadow realm and was pressing against it with the careful insistence of an intelligence that understood boundaries and was testing them rather than breaking them. The flood's psychic contact, when it came, was not the assault he had anticipated. It was a voice. Not sound, not vibration moving through atmosphere. Direct impression, bypassing sensory architecture entirely and arriving in his mind as fully formed meaning. The way extreme cold arrives on skin. Immediate, pervasive, carrying information about itself without using any conventional channel to deliver it. You are not from here. Jin Woo did not respond immediately. He assessed the contact, its texture, its reach, what it could infer about him from the fact of the contact existing. The Gravemind was probing, on a measuring, building a model. He let it build, watching from behind his own awareness with the same patience he had learned in Gates. In the endless dark hours of leveling when patience had been the only resource he had in unlimited supply. We have consumed minds from 10,000 species, the voice continued. Generals, scientists, artists, gods, in the estimation of their own civilizations. We have never encountered a mind structured as yours is. You carry death as a living thing. You wear the unliving as a coat. Still, Jin Woo waited. The flood does not offer. We take, we incorporate, we preserve. In our way, everything that was is kept. Every mind that joins us continues. A pause that felt geological in its depth. But you cannot be taken. We have attempted and failed. So we are doing something we have not done in 100,000 years. You're talking to me, Jin Woo said aloud. The Arbiter turned toward him sharply. Chief, at his angle, had gone very still. We are talking to you. Something in the impression shifted. Not warmth, nothing so biological as warmth, but a recalibration of register, from assessment to proposition. The Forerunners built their rings to kill us. The Covenant wants to fire them for reasons that are insane by any rational standard. The Spartan and his allies want to prevent the firing, which preserves us both. Another pause. But preventing the firing is not the same as solving the problem. The rings still exist. The Covenant still exists. The Forerunner framework still treats us as an infestation to be exterminated rather than a form of life to be addressed. Not the impression deepened. You are outside all of these systems. You owe nothing to the Forerunner legacy. You owe nothing to humanity's military. You owe nothing to the Covenant in any faction. A beat. We are proposing a conversation, not assimilation, not alliance. A conversation between two things that cannot be consumed by this universe's existing power structures. Jin Woo looked at the shadows at his feet, at the place where the shadow realm pressed against the boundary of this universe, where something vast and ancient and ravenously intelligent had found the threshold and was waiting with the patience of a thing that had been patient for 100,000 years. He thought about what it meant that the flood, the parasite that consumed everything, that had never in its recorded history offered anything, was asking to talk. He thought about what the Gravemind might know about Forerunner installations, about the indexing field disrupting his system, about the dimensional scar tissue around the artifact that stood between him and home. He thought about what it cost to listen. I'll hear what you have to say, he said quietly. That's all. The shadows stilled. Behind him, he heard the Arbiter-in-Chief exchange a look whose content he didn't need to see to understand. The scarab never reached them. Jin Woo had turned toward the northwest when the distant thrum of the walker's approach had peaked, had felt it through the ground before he heard it fully in the air. The specific vibration frequency of 14 meters of Covenant engineering moving at assault pace across urban rubble. He had reached out with the ruler's authority at a range that would have seemed impossible to anyone watching, found the scarab's mass at 400 meters and climbing, and applied force to the joint assembly connecting its forward left leg to its primary chassis. The joint was Covenant metallurgy, advanced, resilient, designed for sustained combat. It was not designed for the application of force at the level Jin Woo applied it. The scarab went down at an angle. The sound carried across the ruins of New Mombasa like a building deciding to lie down. The two remaining phantoms in the holding pattern left the area at speed. Whatever targeting calculus their pilots were running had apparently reached a conclusion that Jin Woo found reasonable from their perspective. The mission profile had specified acquisition or elimination of a high-value target, and the operational data now available to them suggested that neither outcome was accessible at current resource levels. Retreating to report was the rational choice. Truth would receive the intelligence, would process it, and would respond with something larger. That was tomorrow's problem. The Arbiter watched the dust column from the scarab's collapse rise above the skyline and said nothing for a long moment. "No, Truth will send an assault carrier next," he said finally. "Then we shouldn't be here when it arrives," Chief said. They moved through the dying city in a column. The Arbiter's 40 Sanghili, Chief, and Torres. Theorem drifting at the rear of the formation in its damaged listing way. And Jin Woo walking slightly apart from all of them in the position he had occupied since the conversation with the Gravemind. Present, cooperative, not integrated. The shadows followed him through the urban ruins, with the fidelity of things that knew their master, pooling in doorways and beneath collapsed overhangs as he passed, marking his path in the specific language of darkness that had always been his first and most honest vocabulary. The Gravemind had not contacted him again since he had agreed to listen. He understood this as a form of respect, or its closest functional equivalent in a distributed intelligence that had consumed enough diplomatic minds to understand that pressing an agreed point was counterproductive. It was waiting. It would wait with the patience of something that existed across hundreds of thousands of flood forms simultaneously and experienced time differently than any individual creature could. Jin Woo had his own relationship with patience and found the quality, at least, recognizable. What he was less comfortable with was the ONI operative. He had noticed her 40 minutes ago. First as a shadow pattern that didn't match wind direction, then as a thermal signature at the edge of his awareness that moved with the specific discipline of someone who'd been trained to follow without being seen. She was good. In a world without the Shadow Monarch's particular relationship with darkness and the things that hid in it, she would have been invisible. She had been tracking the column since they left the facility district, maintaining distance, using the Sanghili warrior's bulk as visual cover. Her equipment's RF signature carefully suppressed. UNSC, clearly. The Arbiter's warriors hadn't flagged her. Their sensors were calibrated for Covenant and flood signatures, not for a lone human moving carefully through human ruins. Chief might have noticed. Jin Woo couldn't tell, and Chief's face was not a document available for public reading. He said nothing about her. Yet. They made extraction to a Sanghili corvette that had set down in the ruins of a football stadium 3 kilometers from the coast. A sleek, predatory vessel whose design language spoke of a species that had built warships the way other species built temples, with an attention to proportion and gravity that went beyond function into something closer to theology. The ship's presence in the Stadium Bowl was deeply incongruous and completely practical, which Jin Woo was beginning to understand as a characteristic quality of how the Arbiter operated. Aboard, in a briefing space that smelled of alien atmosphere processors and old combat and something resinous that Jin Woo had no reference point for, they gathered around a holographic display table that the Arbiter's tactician, a younger Sanghili named Urtas, who moved with the coiled energy of someone who had been in sustained combat for so long that stillness was simply the mode between engagements, populated with navigational data. The halo ring designated Installation 05 rotated slowly in the display above the table. Delta Halo. A blue-white arc against the star field. Its superstructure visible at this scale as a ring of impossible precision. Its interior face a stripe of green and blue that, from this distance, looked peaceful in the way that very large, dangerous things sometimes looked peaceful when you were too far away to see the detail. "The Gravemind is already there," Chief said. It wasn't a question. The flood reached Installation 05 before we were aware of the situation's full scope, the Arbiter confirmed. The Gravemind has established its presence in the installation's lower infrastructure. It is contained, for now, by the ring's own Forerunner defense systems, which it is systematically disabling. He looked at Jin Woo. "You said the Gravemind contacted you." "Yes." "What did it want?" Jin Woo considered how to translate the conversation accurately. "To talk," he said. It was specific about that. Not alliance, not assimilation. A conversation. It said it has never offered this before. The Arbiter's mandibles shifted. Artas looked up from his navigation input. Chief was still. "The Gravemind does not talk," Artas said. "It manipulates. It deceives. Every recorded instance of the Gravemind engaging in apparent dialogue has been a vector for eventual assimilation or strategic misdirection." "I know," Jin Woo said. "And yet you agreed." "I agreed to listen," Jin Woo said. "There's a difference between listening and believing." He paused. "The Gravemind has information I need, specifically about the Forerunner indexing field that's disrupting my abilities. I'm not going to learn that information by refusing to hear it." "It will attempt to manipulate you," Chief said. "It's welcome to try," Jin Woo said. And the flatness in his voice when he said it carried the specific weight of someone who had been manipulated by beings considerably more sophisticated than a parasite and had developed opinions about the process. Theorem, hovering near the briefing table's edge, spoke. "The Shadow Monarch's assessment is strategically sound," it said. "The Gravemind possesses Forerunner data absorbed from consumed Monitor-class intelligences, and it knows more about the indexing field than I do in my current damaged state. If it chooses to share that information as a gesture of good faith, the information will be accurate. The Gravemind does not falsify technical data, as it has no strategic need to. It falsifies intentions and omits context. The technical data itself will be real." "So we go to Installation 05, Jin Woo said. It was at this point that the Oni operative made her move. She came through the Corvette's secondary access corridor. She had boarded during the embarkation confusion, which confirmed she was very good at her work. And she had 2 colleagues with her that Jin Woo had not detected, which meant they had boarded by a different route and were better than she was, or had different equipment, or both. And all 3 wore the unmarked black that was apparently ONI's contribution to the universe's tradition of organizations that believed anonymity was achieved by wearing the same anonymous thing. The operative addressed Chief directly, with the confidence of someone who believed the institutional relationship between Oni and the Spartan program gave her a functional claim on his attention. "Master Chief," she said. "Captain Oren, Office of Naval Intelligence, Section 3. She did not look at the Arbiter, which Jin Woo noted as either professional discipline or institutional contempt, neither of which was a particularly good sign. We're taking custody of the anomaly. Silence in the briefing space. The anomaly has a name, Torres said, from her position near the display table. Captain Oren's eyes moved to Jin Woo with a specific quality of assessment that treated the object being assessed as an object. You came through a Forerunner traversal mechanism, she said. That makes you and everything you carry the intellectual property of the UNSC under Emergency Priority Order 09-88318-1. We have a research vessel in orbital position. You'll be transported? No, Jin Woo said. Oren continued as though he hadn't spoken, which was either tactical or optimistic. To a secure facility where your abilities can be properly studied and... No, Jin Woo said again, with the same tone and the same calm and the complete absence of any indication that a third repetition was available. Oren looked at him fully for the first time since entering the room. Something in what she saw there recalibrated her approach, but not her objective. She was ONI, and ONI's defining characteristic appeared to be that it recalibrated approaches without reconsidering objectives. She turned to Chief. Master Chief, I am ordering you to. He's not under your command, Chief said, and neither am I in this operational context. The Spartan program operates under UNSC authority, which operates under... Captain, Chief said, and something in his voice, not volume, not aggression, just the quality of absolute finality that very few beings achieved, and this one wore naturally, made Oren stop. He just knocked a scarab over with his hand, from 400 meters. A pause. Think carefully about what you're ordering. The briefing space was quiet. Jin Woo looked at Oren with the patient expression of someone who was offering a grace period before the situation reached its natural conclusion. I understand what you want, he said. I understand why your organization wants it. I'm not an asset. I'm not a weapon for someone else to point. I will work toward the same objectives as the UNSC because preventing a galaxy-killing weapon from firing is an objective I share independently. He paused. But I will not be transported anywhere by anyone. And the next person who uses the word custody in relation to me will have a very educational morning. Oren held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she looked at Chief again, found nothing useful there. He looked at the Arbiter, who had watched the entire exchange with the expression of someone watching a weather system, and made the calculation that ONI operatives who reached captain rank made. The one where current resources were insufficient for current objectives and tactical withdrawal preserved future options. This isn't finished, she said. I know, Jin Woo said. She left with her colleagues. The Corvette's secondary corridors swallowed them without ceremony. The Arbiter looked at Jin Woo. Your own species' military just attempted to detain you. Yes, Jin Woo said. And you're still willing to work toward their survival. Jin Woo was quiet for a moment. He thought about a world where hunters had been the weakest and the strongest, where governments had tried to regulate and categorize and control the uncontrollable, and where powerful beings had always attracted the attention of organizations that believed power was a resource to be allocated rather than a person to be respected. He had navigated all of that before. He had protected humanity through all of it, not because its institutions deserved his loyalty, but because its people did. This universe's people were no different from his own. Their military tried to use me, he said. Their people are dying. He looked at the holographic ring turning slowly above the table. Those aren't the same thing. Installation 05 rose in the Corvette's viewports like a question no one had asked for. Jin Woo stood at the forward observation port and looked at it with the particular quality of attention he had developed in Gates. The awareness that preceded engagement. The full system assessment that his years of leveling had trained into something faster than conscious thought. His eyes moved across the ring's visible arc. The superstructure, the interior faces green and blue geography. The Forerunner architecture visible at this distance as a pattern of geometries too precise for anything that hadn't been built by a civilization operating at the outer edge of what matter could be made to do. The ring was 10,000 kilometers in diameter. It had been here for 100,000 years. It was, in the most literal sense available, a god's weapon. Built by beings whose relationship to power had been so far beyond anything Jin Woo's universe had produced that the comparison felt almost categorical rather than merely numerical. He had faced the monarchs. He had faced the rulers of heaven. He had stood in spaces where reality's fundamental architecture was under negotiation. He looked at Halo and felt precisely what it was: a very large problem that needed solving. The Corvette dropped them at the ring's surface in a location the Arbiter's intelligence had identified as a controlled perimeter. An area where the Forerunner defense systems were still active. Flood presence was confirmed, but not dominant. And the terrain provided tactical options. The landing zone was a wide platform of Forerunner composite that had been here since before humanity had learned to write. Its surface marked with the same geometric glyphs Jin Woo had seen in the new Mombasa facility, its edges dropping away to the ring's interior landscape. Forests and rivers at impossible scale. The surface curving up and away at the horizon in the direction that reminded you, constantly and viscerally, that the ground you were standing on was the inside of a ring. The shadows here were different. Jin Woo felt it immediately, a quality to the darkness under the Forerunner structures that was thicker than the ambient dark of a natural environment, charged with the residue of the indexing field theorem had described. He could feel it pushing against the shadow realm's boundary with the methodical insistence of a system doing its job, cataloging, measuring, attempting classification. It wasn't hostile, but it was present in a way that compressed his extraction range and slowed his response time in the specific mode of someone working through interference rather than clear signal. He had 48 hours to fix that, according to theorem. He had considerably less than 48 hours before the tactical situation demanded full capacity. The installation theorem needs is 2 kilometers northeast, Chief said, his HUD providing navigational overlay that Jin Woo couldn't see but could infer from the certainty of the Spartan's directional confidence. There's a flood presence between us and it. Dense. How dense? Torres asked. Chief looked at his motion sensor. Yes, he said. Torres processed this. Right. The Arbiter had brought 12 of his warriors for the surface operation. The others remained aboard the Corvette in orbital hold, available for extraction or fire support depending on how the next several hours resolved. Artas led the Sangheli element with the economical ferocity of someone who had been fighting the flood long enough to have no illusions about it, and had decided that the correct response to having no illusions was simply to be better at the work. Jin Woo watched the Sangheli move into formation and noted the specific way they carried themselves. Not the brittle confidence of beings who believed they were invincible, but the settled weight of warriors who understood exactly what they were capable of and had made their peace with the gap between capability and the requirement. He respected it. Theorem had remained aboard the Corvette for the transit. Its damaged anti-gravity unit was unable to sustain atmospheric operation for extended periods, but had provided detailed installation schematics to Chief's HUD and had given Jin Woo a specific sequence of Forerunner glyph inputs that would, when entered at the installation's primary interface, initiate the indexing field recalibration. Jin Woo had memorized it in the way he memorized everything now. Instantly, completely. With the total recall that had come with the stat increases that had rebuilt him from the inside out. They moved northeast. The flood hit them at the 600-meter mark, not a probing contact. A full commitment, the Gravemind having apparently decided that the approach to the installation was a threshold worth defending, or possibly worth using as a demonstration. Combat forms poured from the tree line to their left. The Halo Ring's forests were old enough to have their own ecology, layers of canopy and undergrowth that the flood had been using as cover and concealment with the patient preparation of an intelligence that had been here longer than they had. The forms were a mix. Human Marines, Covenant infantry, and something else. Larger forms, the biological mass of multiple organisms incorporated into single combat units, moving with a coordination that went beyond the already unsettling coordination of standard combat forms into something that suggested the Gravemind was investing more direct attention into this engagement than it typically bothered with. Chief was already firing. The Arbiter's energy sword came to life with the familiar snap of superheated plasma. Air toss was a continuous motion of blade and movement that converted the Sangheli's natural physical advantages into a mathematics of lethality that the flood forms couldn't outpace. Torres had her shotgun and was using it with the controlled precision of someone who had learned that panic was a luxury that got you killed and had permanently revoked her membership. Jin Woo moved through the engagement like weather. He had decided before the contact began that this was the moment, but the installation was 600 meters ahead. The indexing field was disrupting his extraction process. The tactical situation in front of him was not going to be resolved by holding back, and holding back with a functional solution available was not pragmatism. It was theater. He reached into the shadow realm. The interference pushed back immediately, the indexing field's classification attempts crowding the connection, slowing the gateway, making what should have been instantaneous into something that took 3 full seconds of focused effort. 3 seconds was not a long time. In a combat environment, it was geological. He pushed harder. Igris came through first. The night materialized in darkness that thickened around him like a decision being made. Full armor, blade present, the cold, controlled presence of Jin Woo's most disciplined soldier registering the combat environment with the speed of a being that had been a boss monster and was now something considerably more. The flood forms nearest to Igris's arrival point reacted. Not with fear, because fear wasn't available to them, but with the redirected attention of the Gravemind. Resources being reallocated toward the new variable. Igris gave them no time to reallocate. His blade moved through the nearest form with the clean precision of something that had been doing this since before the flood had a name for what it was encountering. And the darkness around him served as both weapon and territory. Jin Woo's shadow realm asserting itself in the space Igris occupied, creating a pocket of the Shadow Monarch's authority within the Forerunner installation's indexed field. The two systems pushed against each other like tectonic plates, and Jin Woo felt the contact point as a pressure behind his eyes and kept pushing. Beru came through second, and Beru came through loud. The Ant King's materialization was the opposite of Igris's quiet arrival. A detonation of shadow energy that threw 3 flood combat forms backward and announced itself to every sensory system on the battlefield simultaneously. Beru existed at a register between contained and catastrophic. And in the Halo universe's indexed field, at the explosion of his arrival sent a spike through the Forerunner systems that Jin Woo felt as a momentary clearing of the interference. the indexing field redirecting its classification attempts toward the larger, louder, more immediately insistent phenomenon of Beru rather than the deeper, more complex phenomenon of Jin Woo's system. Jin Woo used the window. In the 3 seconds the indexing field spent attempting to classify Beru, Jin Woo extracted 17 Shadow soldiers, not Monarch class, not the highest tier of his army, but solid mid-tier extraction. Warriors who had been strong enough in their original lives to produce substantial shadow material. They materialized in a line across the flood's advance, and in the combat landscape shifted from a defensive engagement being held by 11 warriors to something that looked considerably more like a rout. Chief glanced at the line of Shadow soldiers and then at Jin Woo. "How many can you make?" he asked. "In this universe, with the interference." Jin Woo considered. "This cost more than it should. I need the installation first." "Then let's move," Chief said. They pushed forward through the flood remnants, Igris and Beru anchoring the flanks, the Shadow soldiers absorbing the attention of the Gravemind's redirected forms, the Arbiter's warriors advancing in the gap this created with the efficiency of people who recognized an opportunity and did not ask twice. The flood's response was significant and sustained and ultimately insufficient. Each wave meeting a combination of Spartan precision, a Sankeli ferocity, Shadow soldier attrition capacity, and wherever the density peaked, Jin Woo himself. Moving through the engagement with his hands and his authority and the absolute physical reality of what he was. The installation appeared through the tree line at the 300-meter mark. A Forerunner structure of the mid-scale variety, smaller than the great libraries and larger than the monitoring stations, its exterior covered in active glyphs whose luminescence had the quality of something that had been waiting for input for a very long time. The main interface was visible from the approach. A raised plinth of Forerunner composite with a glyph matrix that matched Theorem's schematic. They cleared the last flood contact 40 meters from the entrance. Jin Woo walked to the interface plinth and looked at the glyph matrix, and the sequence Theorem had given him sat perfectly in his memory, each symbol exact. He raised his hand and began entering the sequence, not with Forerunner tools, but with the ruler's authority, pressing each glyph in the correct order with a precision of telekinetic touch that the interface apparently found acceptable, because each glyph lit in response and held its illumination rather than resetting. Chief watched the perimeter. The Arbiter stood near the entrance. Torres reloaded. Jin Woo reached the final glyph in the sequence and pressed it. The installation hummed, not the breathing frequency of the artifact in New Mombasa, but something more mechanical, more deliberate. The sound of a system executing a specific instruction after a very long period of receiving no instructions at all. The indexed field around him shifted. He felt a change register. From the persistent classification attempt pressure that had been sitting behind his eyes since arrival, to something that recognized him, filed him, and stood down. The Shadow realm opened like a door that had always been there and had simply been stuck. Jin Woo stood at the interface plinth and felt himself complete. The full connection restored, the system's interface clean and responsive. His Shadow army available at full depth and full speed, the extraction process returning to the fluid immediacy it had in his own universe. He reached into the Shadow realm and felt the full weight of what he carried. Igris, Beru, the monarchs he had absorbed, and the soldiers he had raised across years of gates and dungeons, and the long education of becoming. He breathed out once. Then the Gravemind's voice arrived. Not through the ambient shadow this time, but through the installation's own systems, the Forerunner infrastructure conducting it with the clarity of a channel that had been designed for exactly this kind of communication and hadn't been used in 100,000 years. "The Forerunner field has recognized you," it said. That means the installation is now accessible to your authority, as well as its own protocols. A pause carrying oceanic depth. We should speak now, before the Arbiter's patience expires, and before the UNSC sends what they will inevitably send. There is something in this installation that neither of us has been told about. Something the Forerunners sealed here specifically because of beings like you. Jin Woo looked at the installation around him. The glyphs active, the systems online, and the darkness inside the structure deep and completely available to him now. Then tell me, he said. The Gravemind's voice moved through the installation systems like deep water finding its level. Unhurried, pervasive, arriving in every dark corner of the structure simultaneously, and filling it with the quality of something that had been thinking about this conversation for longer than Jin Woo had been alive. The Forerunners did not build the Halo array only to destroy the flood, it said. This is the truth they encoded in their histories and then buried under the version they preferred. The rings were built to destroy all sentient life because the Forerunners believed that was the only way to deny the flood its food source. Starvation on a galactic scale. A pause. But before the rings, there was another solution. One that worked. One that they abandoned. Jin Woo listened. They called it the Sovereign Seal. A Forerunner construct designed not to destroy flood hosts, but to sever the flood's collective consciousness. To cut the connection between the Gravemind's central intelligence and its distributed forms. Without the central coordination, the flood reverts to its base biological state. Dangerous, but manageable. Mortal. The voice deepened. The Forerunners built the seal, tested it, confirmed it worked, and then locked it away in this installation because using it meant accepting that the flood could be defeated without exterminating all life in the galaxy. And the didact? The Forerunner commander who designed the rings could not accept that. He had built the array. His legacy demanded the array be the solution. The installation was very quiet around Jin Woo. Through the entrance, he could see Chief at the perimeter, still listening. The Spartan's helmet angled slightly toward the interior in the way of someone receiving audio and processing it without interrupting. The Arbiter had moved inside at some point and stood 3 meters to Jin Woo's left, with his arms folded and his amber eyes directed at the middle distance of a man doing very concentrated thinking. The Sovereign Seal requires an activation source, the Gravemind continued. Specifically, it requires an energy input that the Forerunner framework does not produce naturally. The construct was designed for use by beings the Forerunners called sovereign remnants. Entities who carry death as a living principle, who exist at the boundary between the animate and the inanimate. Another pause, longer this time, waited. Your taxonomy, Shadow Monarch. The seal was built for something like you. Jin Woo looked at the installation's interior, at the deep chamber beyond the interface plinth, where the Forerunner glyphs were densest and the darkness was thickest, and something at the very back of his awareness had been pulling at him since they arrived, the specific gravity of an object waiting to be found. Where is it? He said. Sub-level 2, behind the primary glyph gate. Your authority will open it. The indexing field has now classified you correctly. And if I activate it, Jin Woo said, what happens to you? The pause that followed was the longest the Gravemind had produced. When it spoke again, something in the register had shifted. Not vulnerability, nothing so biological as that, but a quality of precision that suggested the answer had been arrived at after considerable processing and was being delivered exactly as it was rather than shaped for effect. The central intelligence is severed, it said. The Gravemind, this convergence of consumed minds, this accumulated knowledge of 10,000 species, ceases to function as a unified entity. The individual flood forms revert to basic biology. They die in time. What we are, the collected consciousness, the preservation of every mind we have ever incorporated, disperses. A beat, we end. Then why are you telling me this? Jin Woo said. Because the halo array is worse, the Gravemind said, and the simplicity of it landed like a stone into still water. If the rings fire, every sentient mind in the galaxy dies. Every human, every Sangheili, or every species that has ever looked at a star and wondered. All of it, gone. The flood also dies, yes. But the flood dying alongside everything else is not victory. It is the Forerunner's final failure, dressed as a solution. The voice moved through the installation's bones with the weight of something that had consumed enough philosophers to have genuinely processed what it was saying. We have spent 100,000 years consuming life, because that is what we are. But we have also preserved every mind we consumed. We carry them all, and those minds, those billions of individual consciousnesses absorbed into our collective, do not want to die in a Forerunner fire any more than your species does. Jin Woo was still, but he was thinking about the rulers of heaven, about beings of immense power who had treated humanity as a variable in their calculations, who had decided what was best for the human world from a position so far above it that individual lives had ceased to be legible from their altitude. He was thinking about the Shadow Sovereign and his war, about the monarchs who had invaded his world with their own certainty about what the correct outcome should be. He was thinking about what it meant to be asked to end something. The Gravemind had consumed billions, had converted the living into instruments of its expansion without consent, without mercy, without the possibility of refusal. The minds it claimed to carry, preserved in its collective consciousness, had not chosen preservation. They had been taken. Whatever the Gravemind believed about itself, whatever philosophical framework it had constructed from the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 species of consumed intellectuals, the foundation of its existence was the obliteration of individual choice. And yet, the halo array would kill everyone, including people who had never heard of the flood, never encountered the covenant, never had any say in any of this. People living in villages and cities and ships across the galaxy whose only crime was existing in a universe where two vast forces had been moving toward catastrophe for 100,000 years. He thought about his mother, about the specific weight of protecting people who didn't know they needed protecting, who were living their ordinary lives in the vicinity of something enormous and terrible that hadn't reached them yet. "Well, I'm going to find the seal," he said. The Gravemind said nothing. It had said what it came to say. The Arbiter spoke before Jin Woo reached the sub-level access. "If what it described is real," he said, "and you use it, the flood becomes manageable, individual. The Covenant loyalists still have the index. Truth still intends to activate the ring." "I know," Jin Woo said. "The seal does not solve the Covenant problem." "No," Jin Woo agreed. "It solves this problem. We solve the next one next." The Arbiter looked at him for a moment with the amber eyes that had been continuously assessing since New Mombasa, and had apparently, in this moment, finished their assessment. He nodded once, not agreement with the plan's completeness, but acknowledgement of its logic. Then he turned to his warriors and began giving orders in Sangheili, in the rapid-fire command language that Jin Woo's ear was beginning to parse, not by vocabulary, but by rhythm and urgency. Chief appeared at the entrance. "Covenant loyalist signal. 2 assault carriers, slip space entry in approximately 20 minutes. Truth's response to the Scarab." 20 minutes, Torres said, from her position at the perimeter. "Great, fine, 20 minutes. Jin Woo descended to sub-level 2. The chamber was exactly where the Gravemind had indicated. Behind a glyph gate that read, "His shadow energy," with the same recognition the surface interface had shown, the door opening without resistance, the darkness inside absolute and entirely comfortable. He walked into it without a light source and saw perfectly. On the Shadow Realm and the Forerunner installation's indexed field, operating in the new equilibrium that Theorem's recalibration had established, no longer in conflict, now in a relationship closer to acknowledgement. The Sovereign Seal was at the center of the chamber on a plinth that made the artifact in New Mombasa look like a prototype. It was not large, roughly the size of a human torso, its surface the same Forerunner composite as everything else in the installation, but etched with a density of glyphs that covered every surface, layer upon layer, the symbols overlapping in configurations that suggested the object had been inscribed and reinscribed across multiple ages. It was not active. It sat dormant on its plinth with the patient inertness of something that had been waiting for the right key. But Jin Woo could feel what it was, immediately and completely. A resonance with the shadow energy he carried, a recognition that moved through the chamber like a tuning fork struck against its matching frequency. The Forerunners had built this for something like him, had built it, used it, achieved its purpose, and then locked it away because their commander's pride had demanded a larger, more terrible solution. He reached out and put both hands on the seal. The chamber lit, not with light, but with shadow, the darkness intensifying rather than retreating, the shadow realm pressing through the boundary of this universe, with a sudden urgency that his restored full-capacity connection made possible. The seal's glyphs activated in sequence, cascading from his hands outward across the object's surface, each symbol firing in the order of its inscription. 100,000-year-old ignition sequence executing for the second time in history. He felt it reach, not into the installation, not into the ring, but outward, through the Forerunner framework that connected every installation in the galaxy, through the indexing field that now recognized him and therefore recognized the authority he carried, through the vast, distributed network of Forerunner infrastructure that the Gravemind had been systematically disabling, and which was still, in enough nodes and relays, functional enough to conduct what the seal was sending. The Flood felt it, not as pain. The Flood's distributed biology didn't process pain in any individual sense, but as the specific terror of a collective consciousness feeling its connections begin to dissolve, utter the threads between the Gravemind's central intelligence and its dispersed forms, pulling taut and then going slack. The coordination that made the parasite a galaxy-spanning threat rather than a localized infection degrading with the finality of a signal losing its tower. Through the Shadow Realm, Jin Woo felt the Gravemind at the moment of its severance, felt it as a presence that had been vast and ancient, and is now becoming something smaller, the specific quality of a mind that has decided something and is experiencing the consequences of its decision. In its last moment of full coherence, it sent him something, not words, not another proposition or argument or the elaborate diplomatic framing it had used in every contact since New Mombasa. A memory. One memory from one of the billions it carried, a human memory. A woman standing in front of a window on a ship, looking at a star she'd never seen before, thinking about the distance between herself and home, the specific mixture of fear and wonder that the Forerunner War had not yet touched her enough to extinguish. Jin Woo understood why it sent that particular memory. He held the seal and kept his hand steady and let the sequence complete. Above him, across the ring's surface, the flood forms that had been coordinated and purposeful 30 seconds ago began moving with the disoriented randomness of creatures whose direction had been removed. They were still dangerous. Biological danger didn't require intelligence. But they were no longer an army. They were animals, manageable animals. The chamber was quiet when the sequence finished. The seal's glyphs dimmed from their activation state to a residual glow, not dormant again, but spent, the way something looks after it has finally done what it was made to do. Outside, Jin Woo could hear Chief's voice through the installation's walls, calm, operational, coordinating with the Arbiter's forces as the Sanghaili warriors engaged the disoriented flood remnants with the efficiency of people who had just watched an impossible problem become merely a difficult one. He let go of the seal and stood in the darkness for a moment. The assault carriers were 20 minutes out. The Covenant loyalists still had the Index, and a prophet who believed in his religion enough to end the galaxy for it. He had a Spartan, an Arbiter, a damaged Monitor, a Corporal who deserved a promotion, 12 Sangheili warriors, making a shadow army operating at full capacity in a universe where no one had ever seen anything like it. He thought, this is solvable. He walked back up to the surface. The two assault carriers dropped from slipspace simultaneously. Jin Woo watched them arrive from the installation's exterior platform. Watched the specific quality of their emergence, the way slipspace ruptures announce themselves as tears in the visible sky before resolving into the physical presence of the ships themselves. Each vessel 1.5 kilometers of Covenant engineering, moving with the ponderous gravitational certainty of things that had been built to end arguments rather than have them. Their hulls caught the light of the Halo Ring's artificial sun in long purple curves, their energy projectors charging with the slow inevitability of weapons that didn't need to hurry because nothing they had ever targeted had successfully moved out of their way in time. The Loyalist complement began deploying immediately. Phantoms disgorging in waves from both carriers, their flight paths converging on the installation's coordinates, with the organized precision of forces that had been given clear targeting data and a simple objective. Retrieve the artifact, eliminate the anomaly, confirm the Arbiter's death. 3 objectives, clean and sequential. The kind of operational order that looked straightforward on a command display and revealed its complications only on the ground. Chief was beside him. Options. Several, Jin Woo said. The carriers have energy projectors that can cut this installation apart from orbit, Chief said. They'll use them if the ground assault fails. Truth doesn't care about the seal anymore. The Gravemind is broken. The flood threat is degraded. What he cares about now is the Index and the Ring's activation systems. A beat. If he activates the Ring, everything on its surface dies, including us. Then he doesn't activate it, Jin Woo said. Chief looked at him with the visor's flat reflective surface that concealed the expression beneath it, but not the quality of attention it represented. The Spartan's assessment running at full speed behind the gold mirror. You're talking about the carriers? Yes. Both of them? Yes. A pause. At the same time? Jin Woo looked at the 2 vessels hanging in the Ring's sky, the distance between them, the geometry of their positions, the ruler's authority measuring range and mass, and the specific calculation of what it cost to do what he was considering. In his own universe, at full capacity, the question wouldn't have been a question. And in this universe, at full capacity, because he was at full capacity now, the indexing field recalibrated, the shadow realm open and immediate, his army fully present at his shoulder, the question was still not a question. It was simply a large task. Cover the phantom waves, he said to Chief. I need 90 seconds without aerial interference. Chief turned to Torres immediately. Torres was already moving to her position, her comm live, coordinating with the Arbiter's warriors as they established anti-air lines across the installation's perimeter. The Sangheili had deployable plasma launchers that could engage phantoms effectively at short range. and Artaz had them distributed along the platform edges with the speed of a commander who had been doing this long enough to anticipate the order before it arrived. And Jin Woo walked to the platform's edge. The Shadow Army materialized around him in silence. Igris first, then Beru, then the full depth of what he carried. The Shadow soldiers arraying themselves across the platform and the installation's exterior, with the ordered precision of a force that had never needed to be told twice. They were fully present in this universe now, their forms stable, their connection to the Shadow Realm clean and uninterrupted. The Forerunner indexing field had classified them alongside their master, unknown category, sovereign remnant class, no engagement protocol, and had stood down its interference entirely. The Phantoms hit the perimeter. The Arbiter's warriors engaged. Plasma fire crossing with the Loyalists' incoming formations, the air above the installation becoming a dense and violent geometry of energy exchanges that Torres navigated from her position with the calm of someone who had accepted. That calm was a professional requirement rather than an emotional achievement. Igris moved into the close engagement with the economy of motion that defined him, his blade-clearing flood remnant forms that were being pushed toward the installation by the Loyalist advance. The flood not coordinated, not purposeful, but still biologically dangerous in the way that cornered animals were dangerous. Their disorganized presence complicating the Loyalist deployment and buying seconds that Jin Woo noted and used. He raised both hands toward the carriers. The ruler's authority at full expression in this universe felt different from how it felt at home. Not weaker, but more expensive. The energy cost higher in a universe whose ambient conditions didn't replenish his particular kind of power the way his home universe's metaphysical substrate did. He was not limitless here. He was very powerful here, and those were different things. And he had always understood the difference between them because the difference between them was what had saved him from the arrogance that killed talented people. He didn't need to destroy the carriers. He needed to make them stop. The first carrier's energy projector was cycling to fire. He could see it from the platform, the ventral weapon system's charging glow building toward the threshold that preceded discharge. He found the projector's housing with the ruler's authority and closed around it with the specificity of someone reaching for a particular object on a crowded shelf. The housing was composite covenant alloy, resilient, military grade, designed to sustain combat damage. It was not designed for the application of force from outside its engineering parameters. The projector housing buckled. The charging energy had nowhere to discharge. Internal systems rerouted, alarm cascades propagating through the carrier's command deck as engineers scrambled to understand why their primary weapon had reported a catastrophic structural failure with no incoming fire, no impact, no causal event that any sensor on the ship could identify. The carrier began emergency venting its projector charge, a precautionary measure that would take 4 minutes and during which the weapon was completely offline. 4 minutes was enough. The second carrier had watched its companion's projector fail and was now performing the tactical calculus of whether to proceed with its own firing solution or reassess. Jin Woo answered the question for it. Found its gravity drive assembly, the secondary unit on the port side whose function was attitude control and orbital stability, and applied the same specific pressure to the same specific structural component. The carrier listed, not catastrophically, not the falling out of the sky that the Scarab had performed in New Mombasa. A controlled list, the ship's automated systems compensating for the sudden asymmetry in its drive output by redistributing power from weapons and shields to stability. A ship that was managing an unexpected drive failure was a ship that was not firing its energy projectors. Its captain would be making rational decisions about not adding weapons discharge stress to a vessel already managing a structural crisis. The Phantoms above the installation began pulling back. the command signal from both carriers shifting from assault authorization to hold and assess. The ground operation paused while the ship's command personnel processed what was happening to their vessels from an enemy they couldn't locate, couldn't target, and couldn't explain. 90 seconds. Jin Woo lowered his hands. Chief was looking at him from across the platform. "Both of them," the Spartan said. "Both of them," Jin Woo confirmed. The Arbiter contacted Truth directly. It was, Jin Woo understood, on the move that required the most of the Sangheli warrior, not physically, not tactically, but in the specific currency of pride and history that governed how a being who had been the Covenant's sword chose to speak to the prophet who had wielded him. The communication went through the Loyalist carrier's command channel, the Arbiter's identity confirmed, and his request for direct audience granted, because Truth, whatever else he was, understood that the Arbiter contacting him from the surface of a ring his carriers could no longer shoot at was a development worth hearing. Jin Woo stood at the Arbiter's shoulder during the transmission. Truth's holographic image materialized above the Arbiter's portable projector. Ancient, robed, the specific quality of a being whose certainty about his own righteousness had calcified over centuries into something indistinguishable from fact in his own mind. His eyes found the Arbiter and moved immediately to Jin Woo with the sharp, acquisitive attention of a being who had survived in power long enough to recognize variables and assess them before they assessed him. He looked at Jin Woo for a long moment. Jin Woo looked back. "The Flood's central intelligence has been severed," the Arbiter said. "The Gravemind is gone. The parasite is degraded to its base biological state, dangerous but finite, manageable, no longer a galactic threat." He paused. The justification for activating the halo array no longer exists. Truth was quiet. His eyes had not left Jin Woo. "The great journey," he began, "is a lie," the Arbiter said. "When you know it is a lie, you have known for longer than you have allowed yourself to acknowledge." His voice carried no anger. Something past anger, the particular tone of a being who had burned through fury and come out the other side into something cooler and more final. The Forerunners did not ascend. The rings do not transcend. They kill. That is their function. That is their only function. Truth looked at Jin Woo again. "What are you?" he said. And the question was genuine. The first genuine thing he had said, stripped of the prophetic register by simple inability to process what he was looking at. "Someone from outside your theology," Jin Woo said. "Which means I have no investment in how it resolves. I have an investment in whether this ring fires." He paused. "It won't. You cannot. I just disabled both of your carrier's primary weapons with my hands," Jin Woo said. "From the surface of the ring, without equipment." He let that sit for a moment. "I'm not telling you the ring won't fire as a threat. I'm telling you as a fact so you can plan accordingly." Truth's image flickered. Not technical interference, but the specific quality of a hologram operated by a person experiencing something they had not prepared for. His eyes moved between the Arbiter and Jin Woo, and then to something beyond both of them. The middle distance of a man whose framework for understanding power had just encountered a data point it couldn't incorporate. The transmission ended. The carriers held their positions for 47 minutes. Then they entered slip space. The ring was quiet in the aftermath. The particular quiet of a large, dangerous thing that had been standing at the edge of its purpose and been stepped back from it. The specific silence of a catastrophe that had been close enough to smell and had then receded. The flood remnants on the surface were being systematically cleared by the Arbiter's forces and the Shadow soldiers working in coordinated sweeps. The disorganized biological forms offering nothing like the resistance the Gravemind coordinated army had provided. It was difficult work. It was finishing work. The kind of work that got done because it needed doing, and the people capable of doing it were present. Chief found Jin Woo at the installation's edge, looking out across the ring's interior curve. "Truth will regroup," Chief said. "Yes," Jin Woo said, "and this isn't over." "No," Jin Woo agreed. He was looking at the ring's geography, at the impossible scale of it, the forests and rivers and plains of a constructed world, the interior face curving up and away until it disappeared into the haze of distance. A god's weapon that had almost fired, a galaxy that had come within 47 minutes of a silence that would have lasted forever. It's not over, but it's different now. He paused. The flood without the Gravemind is a problem with a solution. The Covenant without their religious justification is a political problem. Political problems have more options than apocalyptic ones. Chief was quiet for a moment. "You're not leaving." It wasn't a question. A Jin Woo had been thinking about the dimensional scar tissue since New Mombasa, had been running the calculation that Theorem had given him. The 6 hours of preparation the artifact required, the specificity of the energy signature needed to reopen the rift. All of it was possible. None of it was today. "Not yet," he said. "Theorem says the preparation could be complete in 3 days," Chief said, "if the artifact in New Mombasa is still intact." "It is," Jin Woo said. He had checked through the Shadow Realm, the darkness in the facility's sub-levels still connected to him across the distance. "I can feel it." Chief nodded. 3 days was a timeline that implied other things, that the work between now and then would continue, that the Covenant problem would not wait for 3 days, that the universe they were standing in had not finished requiring things of the people standing in it. He didn't say any of this. He simply nodded and moved back toward the perimeter, where Torres was coordinating the final sweep with Urtas and the exhausted, blood-scored efficiency of people who were still standing and intended to remain so. The Arbiter approached last. He stood beside Jin Woo at the installation's edge and looked out at the ring with the amber eyes that had been assessing since the beginning and had arrived, Jin Woo thought, at something close to finished. "In 3 days, the Arbiter said. "In 3 days, Jin Woo confirmed. "Before you go," the Arbiter said, "there is the matter of truth, and the index, and the political fracture inside what remains of the Covenant." He paused. "These are solvable problems." "You don't need me for them," Jin Woo said. "No," the Arbiter agreed. "But I find that I would prefer your presence while we solve them." He paused again, the specific pause of a being choosing words with the care of someone for whom words had historically been weapons and was attempting to use them differently. You came through a rift you didn't choose, into a war you didn't start, for a species you have no obligation to, in a universe that has no record of what you are. He looked at Jin Woo directly. "And you solved the unsolvable problem." "Not alone?" Jin Woo said. The Arbiter's mandibles shifted, the configuration Jin Woo had been learning across the hours of this impossible day, the one that functioned as a Sangheili's version of acknowledgement. "No," he said, "not alone." Jin Woo looked out at the halo ring one final time, at the blue-white arc against the stars, at the interior face where his shadow soldiers were finishing their work, and the Arbiter's warriors were standing down from combat posture in the specific way of people who had survived something and were allowing themselves to know it. At the Forerunner installation behind him, with its spent seal and its recalibrated indexing field. At the sky where 2 assault carriers had been and were no longer. 3 days. He had 3 days in a universe that was not his own, with people who were not his people. fighting a war that had been running for longer than his world had known what a gate dungeon was. He had done more with less. In the end, the Halo array fell silent. Not because of a Spartan sacrifice or a Sangheili warrior's redemption, though both of those things were real and both of them mattered. It fell silent because something arrived from outside the equation entirely. A man who owed this universe nothing and chose to save it anyway. Not from obligation, but from the simple, unargued conviction that people deserved to keep living. The Gravemind was gone, its 100,000-year hunger dissolved by a weapon built by the civilization that had created the hunger in the first place. The flood remnants would be cleared. Truth would face a reckoning. The Covenant would fracture further, and from its fracture something new might eventually grow, as things sometimes do after long catastrophes. Das and the Shadow Monarch stood at the edge of a Forerunner installation on a ring that had almost ended everything, and looked at the stars of a universe that was not his own, with the expression of a man who had learned, across the long, terrible education of becoming what he was, that strength without purpose was simply noise. In 3 days, he would go home. He would carry nothing from this universe except the knowledge that the multiverse's most dangerous places were not the ones with the largest weapons. They were the ones where the largest weapons were held by the smallest certainties. He would remember the woman in the Gravemind's memory, standing at her window, looking at her unfamiliar star, wondering about the distance home.